This interview with Gavin Dudenay was recorded on Monday, December 4th, 2006. Please visit edtechlive.com for more interviews, for information on our upcoming Drupal, Moodle, and Web 2.0 workshops in Philadelphia, and for links to EduBloggerCon, the 2007 gathering of educational bloggers in Atlanta, Georgia. Good morning, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to EdTech Live. This morning my guest is Gavin Dudenay from the consultancy, and our topic is Second Life, and specifically their presence in Second Life called EduNation. Hello, Gavin.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thanks. Thanks for joining me. It's 8 a.m. in California, and you are where?
I'm in Barcelona in Spain, where it's just after 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
We could probably do a whole session on the miracle of Skype. We don't need to today, but I do find this fascinating that there can be so many really rich conversations that now take place all over the world.
It is a fantastic technology, I think, and one that we use increasingly. So anyway, great to be here and glad we could do it this way.
Thanks, Gavin. There's a lot of interest in Second Life, and I will probably edit this interview and post it right away today because people have expressed a real desire to learn about Second Life and educational uses of Second Life. Before we jump into that, could you give a little bit of background about yourself and your company?
Okay, well, personally, I've been involved in education since 1989, when I moved from the UK to Spain, first as an English teacher, then as a teacher trainer, and in more recent years, I started one of the first online language schools called Net Languages, which is still going. And in the last 2.5 years, I've been running my own consultancy, which is called The Consultancy.
You should spell that.
Yes, it's The Consultants-E, and it was supposed to be a clever pun on E for electronic, but unfortunately nobody or very few people ever get the joke. Anyway, there are two of us based in Barcelona and one in Glasgow, and we specialize in online training and development, really, for all sorts of disciplines. In a way, materials development and online training is discipline independent, so we don't just work with educators, but we've also worked with medical companies and all sorts of people who basically have a lot of information which they need to get out to a lot of people around the world. So that's our basic, those are the basic things we do, online training courses and materials development.
Terrific. Now, can you tell us a little bit about Second Life?
Okay, well, I don't know how many people have heard of it, but increasingly in the last 2 months, it's had an incredible buzz in the media. And I guess that's primarily because up until about 2 or 3 months ago, it was very, very much an individual thing. And now more and more, increasingly, companies are moving into Second Life. Second Life is basically an online three-dimensional world in which you take on the form of an avatar or a kind of cartoon character, and you can wander around that world interacting both with people and with the objects in the world. So just as in our real world we have schools, museums, clubs, casinos, cafes, houses, etc. Second Life also has these things. The difference, I guess, between Second Life and a lot of other online environments is that the company who builds Second Life provides Second Life as an empty environment, and the environment is then constructed by the people who play in the environment, if you like. So we build the houses, we build the museums, we build the classrooms, and we fill them with chairs and notepads and eventually people. So basically, imagine something like The Sims, three-dimensional game, but perhaps a little more robust and also a little more interactive. And that brings us kind of up to date in the sense that up until maybe 6 months ago, it had very few users and was quite a well-kept secret. Now there are large companies like Dell, IBM, etc., moving into Second Life and establishing their own virtual presence, which kind of mirrors their real-life presence. So, for example, you can design a laptop in Second Life at the Dell center and then have it built in real life. So I guess it's become slightly more in the press in the last few weeks because of these large companies.
I don't know whether to be scared or to be excited about Second Life. I went in for the first time last week after arranging to interview you, and I was fascinated by how compelling it is to have a three-dimensional model of the internet world. It almost seems to kind of complete the experience of being able to navigate and to have things in different places. At the same time, I thought, oh my gosh, this is just, this could suck you in and you'd never come out.
Yeah, it is a very compelling experience if you compare it to, I guess, a website or a blog, in the sense that it's much more lively and obviously not as static and two-dimensional. But I guess it's also part of that move towards the whole idea of Web 2, where sites become more interactive, where the content is created by the user rather than the provider or the supplier. In terms of addiction, I'm probably not the right person to speak to, because having, as we'll get onto later, having bought an island and turned it into an educational centre, this has taken up a lot of hours of my time over the last 4 months. And I guess I've spent possibly 8 to 10 hours in Second Life every day for the past 3 or 4 months. But it is an extremely compelling experience. The ability to walk, drive cars, ride bicycles, wear roller skates, fly, and move around this incredibly large universe full of people, all doing their own things, from making and selling virtual clothes, to running casinos, to running nightclubs, and then on to what I hope we're going to talk about soon, education. You can easily get lost in there, and in fact it's possibly not the most user-friendly interface I've ever come across, which is another reason I think why a lot of people start in Second Life, perhaps last about 3 days, don't really see the point of it, find it a little bit too difficult, and then leave it. So if anybody listening is thinking of going to Second Life, I would encourage you to spend a bit of time in there. Don't get put off immediately by the difficulties. And come and look for me, and I'll be happy to show you around and teach you a few basics too.
Well, I do know that when I logged in Thursday or Friday, they were having some technical difficulties, and maybe that's associated with the volume of traffic. But I got messages that said we're having a problem, we can't teleport you or transport you to where you want to go. Is that common?
Well, Second Life is on quite a tight development cycle at the moment, which means that generally speaking there is a new release of the client software every 2 weeks. As they add new features and refine features that are already in there. Inevitably, whenever there's a new release, there is 24 hours of chaos, as some things which didn't work start working, a few things that did work stop working, and they run around frantically trying to solve all these problems. But in general, it's an extremely stable environment. The worst time you could go in is a Thursday, which is every second Thursday, which is the day after an update, because that's when the problems usually appear. But they're usually ironed out pretty quickly.
I'm sure Murphy's Law demanded that I actually go in that very day, because that's probably what happened.
Absolutely. I'm sure it was a Thursday. The good thing, obviously, about a development cycle like that is that new features are added so regularly that Second Life just continues to get better and better. And I guess we have to learn to take the rough with the smooth a little bit, and try and ignore the little problems that crop up once every 2 weeks.
So I know you're anxious to talk about the educational aspect, but if it's okay with you, I'd like to describe a little bit more some of the details of Second Life, just because I think this will be very interesting. When you go in, you establish an avatar or an identity, a physical identity, and you can change that, and you can put different kinds of clothing on it. You can make yourself to look like you want to in this environment. And then I also noticed that you don't get to choose your own name as your username.
Yes, there are like any other piece of software, I guess there are some quirks. With regard to the names, you get to choose your first name, but you have to choose a surname from a drop-down list of available surnames. I think that the company Linden Labs, who make Second Life, the idea was that by choosing common surnames, people might start to get together, and it might actually facilitate the social nature of Second Life, which is why occasionally you meet someone with the same surname, and it's actually quite nice to say, hey, you've got the same surname, why did you choose that one? And so I think their idea was to encourage some kind of basic social interaction. In terms of getting in there in the first place, you go to secondlife.com, download the clients, create your free account, and then basically you decide whether you want to be a male or a female avatar. And then you're born into Second Life wearing something pretty basic, such as a pair of jeans and a white T-shirt. So I had a discussion recently with somebody about the money aspect of Second Life. Basically, you arrive in what I might call Walmart clothes, the kind of basics. If you want to be walking around in Armani or Hugo Boss suits or anything, you then have to start spending money, which means spending real dollars using your credit card or a PayPal account to buy some of the currency which is used in Second Life, which is called the Linden, and then moving around Second Life, going to some of the clothes shops and spending some of these Lindens on some fancy clothes, a nice suit, pair of shoes, sunglasses, whatever you think your character should be wearing. Once you have these clothes in your inventory or your little store cupboard, you can then just right-click on them and choose to wear them. So you can customize your avatar quite a lot. And in fact, if people see the photograph of me and then see my avatar, they'll see that I look exactly the same as I do in real life, except in Second Life my avatar works out a little bit more than I do.
Well, I think people are going to also be intrigued with the money aspect. You are given some amount of Linden dollars or Linden when you first go in, right?
That's correct, yeah. A very small amount, which is pretty much enough to probably buy a pair of trousers and a shirt. Uh-huh.
Now, who makes the... is it entrepreneurial individuals who manufacture the code to create other kinds of clothing that you're buying from, or is this part of the company's actual revenue stream?
No, the company doesn't actually make anything at all. Everything that you can buy in terms of clothes, gadgets, etc. If you want a television screen for your house, then you buy that from another resident who's actually made that object and possibly scripted it to do something clever. So there are, for example, there's a character in Second Life called Amy Weber, who is a very famous clothing designer, and she regularly makes quite large amounts of money designing and selling virtual clothes. Other things in the economy, there's a Chinese company run by a lady called Ansi Chung, who just became the first Second Life millionaire. She trades in virtual real estate, so she buys virtual islands in Second Life. She divides them up into various parcels, and she sells them off at a profit. Another guy makes roller skates, for example. So if you want your avatar to skate, you can buy roller skates. They cost, I think, about 25 American cents in real money, and he's sold 50,000 copies of those in the last year. So this is the kind of economy that's generated in Second Life. Once you have made a little bit of money in Second Life, you can then exchange those lindens back into real-life American dollars, cash them in, and go off and spend them in the real world. So, yeah, it's quite an odd economy and a very interesting new model.
So I know that I've seen other people advertise using Second Life as an actual meeting space. Now, can that be effective?
I think it can. Recently, well, it depends really who you want to get to, and I guess who you want to advertise to. But the demographics of Second Life are quite interesting. It's got almost a 50-50 split between male and female users, and the average user is in their mid-30s, which says a little bit about the kind of disposable income they may have, I guess. The people that I'm dealing with are not really commercial in that sense. Recently we had 4 prospective Dutch parliamentary candidates on our island in Second Life where they held a debate. This was before the Dutch general election. They held a debate, and it was attended by lots of members of the press from around the world, but also interested citizens. And I guess for the politicians, it's a way of getting to a younger demographic who are perhaps turned off with politics, or perhaps might never get to websites connected with politics or whatever. So it can be very effective, I think, and that got a lot of press coverage, and I guess may have had a small impact on the amount of votes that those 4 candidates received.
So I'm imagining that if I want to hold a virtual meeting, there are a number of tools that I can use that currently exist, like Skype or video conferencing programs or just some basic web programs. But they're all very much a computer program that I link into and use for the purpose of hearing audio or speaking or online chatting. What seems to me to be so interesting about Second Life is it gives physical form to that. And does that make it easier for people to kind of conceptually think about attending such a meeting?
I think you put your finger on it, actually. The main difference is probably that there's a certain amount of human warmth in the interactions, for many reasons. You have visual cues which you lose often in text and voice chat. So, for example, if I'm chatting to somebody in Second Life, they'll be standing in front of me, and they've made obvious choices about how they look, the clothes they wear, whether they stand near me, whether they wander off and look at something interesting while I'm talking, etc. So, in a way, the human nature side of communications comes back in. In terms of the tools, Second Life combines lots of different tools. So, for example, in the island that we look after, there are various conference facilities, but one room is dedicated to what you might call a more traditional conference approach, where there's a very large screen with a laptop near it, which can be used for giving PowerPoint presentations. So everybody can sit in the room and view the same PowerPoint presentation.
So people are sitting at their computer, they're looking at this environment of Second Life, and in that environment there's a screen, and they're watching a PowerPoint be displayed.
That's right, and that can actually be accompanied by text chat or voice chat. In fact, what we use on our island in Second Life is a voice server called Ventrilo, which was actually developed to be used with online games. The big issue with online games is that they actually take up an awful lot of bandwidth in terms of internet connection, and so often things like Skype don't work too well. So we use the Ventrilo server, which adds voice communication to a PowerPoint presentation. So, for example, in that room, we can have a speaker or speakers presenting using PowerPoint, talking to the audience with voice, and then the audience can ask questions afterwards, very much like a traditional seminar or conference presentation.
How large an audience or group can you actually have participate?
Second Life, because of the way the graphics are streamed, suffers from what the residents call lag, which means that the more graphic detail that needs to be streamed at one given point, the slower everything becomes. So inevitably that does put a limit on the number of people who can be in one place at the same time. With a private island, the kind of thing that we're doing with Edunation, theoretically you can have up to 80, 90 people, as long as they're all not riding around on unicycles or bicycles or wearing very extravagant clothes. So it's certainly not unlimited. And I guess the average would be 50 to 60 people in one place at the same time. Fascinating.
So let's shift gears and let you talk a little bit about the educational aspects. And to do so, one of the things that I noticed was that there are adult sections in Second Life. And are there going to be the same issues with regard to internet safety for youth using Second Life?
Well, in fact, at the moment, Second Life is divided up into what they call 2 grids. There's the adult grid, which is 18 and over, and there's the teen grid. And the teen grid is policed in many ways so that adults who want to get onto the teen grid, for example, for educational purposes, have to go through quite a stringent security background check. done by a private company. So in many ways, the Teen Grid is a far more controllable environment, and an environment that lots of organisations around the world are using with younger learners. So I know, for example, the British Council, which is a large educational organisation in the UK, is buying an island for the Teen Grid, where they know that things will be safer in terms of safety for younger learners. For adults, there isn't that luxury unless you actually buy a private island. A private island you can make invisible to the rest of Second Life. So if you have an island, you can make it only accessible to the people you invite. So that does make it a private educational environment. But of course, adults will inevitably leave those places and go and experiment with Second Life. And I think that it has to be made clear to them that Second Life is pretty much as varied and rich as real life, and so they might find things that they're not particularly happy seeing.
If you have, if you're doing something for youth and you're entering into the Teen Grid or doing something comparable, once the student logs in, can they be locked into only being in that area, or are they, once introduced into the environment, going to have to make the choice not to go into other areas?
No, in the Teen Grid they can be locked into a specific area or a specific island, which I think is why there are quite a few teen educational projects going on, simply for the fact that the control is much, much better. And there are some fantastic teen educational projects happening at the moment. If people want to check out, one of the good websites is holymeatballs.org, O-R-G. And that gives some information on some of the teen projects currently happening in Second Life. In terms of...
So tell us about... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, in terms of adult education, there are currently, I think, over 30 universities involved in projects in Second Life. The best place to start to find out some information is SimTeach, S-I-M, teach.com, which is a website dealing exclusively with the use of multi-user virtual environments in education. But my interest was really aroused by a character in Second Life called IntelliGirl Tully, otherwise known as Sarah Robbins, who teaches at Ball State University. And she was running a creative writing course at the university. The students meet every Tuesday at the university to do kind of, I guess, the more traditional sessions. And on Thursdays they meet in Second Life, where they go out and do field research. And I went along to observe a couple of her classes in Second Life. I particularly remember one where she had all the male avatars change their sex to female avatars and dress up in female clothes, and vice versa, and they all went off and wandered around Second Life to see how differently people reacted to them as a member of the opposite sex, which obviously then informed their later writing projects. And that's the kind of thing you can't really do in real life, or at least it's much more difficult to pull off. So that's just one of many, many interesting educational projects that's happening in Second Life at the moment. What we're trying to do is, with EduNation, which is a private island within the adult grid, is to provide a kind of starting place for educators, a place where they can come and try out the facilities, maybe try running a class, try doing a PowerPoint presentation, or just simply a discussion group or whatever. And we provide them with some space to do that, as well as the tools that they might need. So it's a kind of a jump-off place for people who think they might see something in Second Life, but perhaps don't want to invest the money yet.
Can you give some other examples of teachers or students using Second Life in educational ways?
There's a very interesting project coming out of Harvard Law School, where they're running an open course on cyber law. And they have a very great and grand recreation of one of the college rooms on an island in Second Life, where they meet and do a course in online internet law every week. On EduNation itself, we have an extremely active group called the Webheads, who are an online community of practice who, up until now, have been meeting using Yahoo groups and a number of other tools to explore the uses of technology in the classroom. They're currently using Edunation as a place to meet, to discuss ideas and discuss new technologies. And in fact, their use of Second Life is interesting because they're not really using any of the tools that one can use. They're not using any video displays. They're not really using any audio tools, or very rarely are they using things like PowerPoint displays or image displays. What they do is they meet up in a very relaxed and social environment to catch up on the kind of tools and the kind of projects they've been doing during the week with their learners, and to as a quicker and more social way of exchanging ideas and experience, I think. Those are just a few. It really is worth having a look at the SimTeach website to get more of an idea of the kind of organizations and what they're doing as well. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that the educators in Second Life are an extremely friendly and helpful bunch. So if you do find out about a project and you really want to know something more, get in touch with that person, and more often than not they'll be more than happy to invite you along to watch what they're doing, which can be a very good learning experience.
Could we have held this interview in Second Life?
Absolutely, we could have done. I was recently interviewed in Second Life on Edunation. We sat in there's a beautiful tropical garden in the centre of the island, and we sat there under the palm trees and we did an interview. The only problem is, as I think I mentioned before, is that perhaps things like Skype don't work particularly well with Second Life. So the voice there was done with Ventrilo, which you can also use to record. But maybe it would have been more interesting. We could have had a walk around Second Life at the same time.
Maybe we'll save that for a follow-up. Are there good examples of K-12 use of Second Life or Edunation?
Unfortunately, I can't tell you, because as an adult who's not an educator involved in a Second Life project with the Teen Grid, I don't have access to the Teen Grid. And even if I were to go through the security check procedure, they still wouldn't. Linden Labs still wouldn't allow me to walk around the Teen Grid without any active educational project going on. So I don't have access to the Teen Grid. Anecdotally, I know of projects. There was an excellent project in the summer which was to do with child sexual slavery, where the kids were educated about what's happening in that context around the world, and they then produced an amazing interactive gallery of posters and texts and votes and questionnaires and quizzes. And the website I mentioned earlier, which is holymeatballs.org, has a very good report on that and some fantastic photographs from that. So anecdotally, I know of projects like this, but I've not actually seen any because I'm not able to have access to the Teen Grid. But obviously, apart from these things, there are activist groups who are working there. We had the Stand Up for Poverty campaign in Second Life recently, which was a mirror of the real life one, where everyone was supposed to stand for 2 minutes in silence in order to provoke some kind of reaction from world governments. That was also mirrored in Second Life. I've seen some interesting medical simulations, a fantastic simulation on schizophrenia, where your avatar experiences through auditory and visual cues exactly what it's like to have schizophrenia. I've seen medical training for doctors in heart murmur problems. I've seen disaster recovery training where people learn how to cope in the aftermath of a small terrorist attack or a leak of poisonous gases. So there are all kinds of projects happening. It really is a vibrant education and training community in there.
Is the software that you download for Second Life available on any platform besides Windows?
Yes, in fact, it's available for Windows and Mac, and there's I'm not sure if it's alpha now, but certainly a beta client for Linux, which I've heard good things about. So it is available for all of the three major platforms. Obviously, but inevitably the Windows version is probably the most developed one at the moment.
How closely do you think educators should be watching this technology?
Um, ooh, I think that really depends. My real life company does an awful lot of work around the world, and we work in all sorts of countries with varying conditions of infrastructure. And this year alone, I've been in Venezuela, Siberia, for example, countries which we might traditionally expect to be perhaps not as well developed infrastructurally. What's interesting with a lot of countries around the world, which we might consider to be developing countries, is that they've made a jump, they've leapfrogged a certain stage of technological development. And in fact, many of the developing countries have a much better IT infrastructure in terms of internet connections and bandwidth than we might expect. So I think one of the arguments that's often put against things like Second Life is that it does require an awful lot of bandwidth, and I think I'd probably leave that one aside. What it does need, obviously, is an awful lot of training, and one of the issues that I find with educators, myself included, is that we have very little time outside of what we do in our day-to-day lives to learn an awful lot of new technologies. And there are exceptions to that. The Webheads group I mentioned earlier, who regularly explore new technologies. But I do think that teachers are very, very busy people. So I would be loath to say that this is the direction that education is going in. However, I think that it is possibly the direction that distance education might be going in, or training in geographical circumstances where it's almost impossible to get a lot of people together at the same time. I think it also has implications for learners who are perhaps not so mobile for whatever reason. But there are some interesting projects happening at the moment. There's a project called Sloodle, that's SLOODLE, and that project aims to bring the open source virtual learning environment Moodle together with Second Life, and to try and facilitate communications between virtual learning environments and these three-dimensional environments. So should educators be interested? My personal opinion is yes, they should be, because I think inevitably technology is heading this way. It's heading into a more three-dimensional interactive position in the next couple of years. I think it's possibly what learners of a certain age are more familiar with. Anybody under 30 probably grew up playing video games, whereas people of my age didn't. And in some respects, I think we need to appeal to their learning styles and their interests. So, should you do it? Do you have to do it? No. Should you do it? I think possibly have a look at least before discounting it.
Gavin, I have to say, I think I'll be thinking about this interview for days. I'm intrigued.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. What I'd like to say is, anybody who does listen to it, if you do want to try Second Life, then one of your best bets is to get in touch with me in Second Life. My character name is Dudenay G. That's Dudeney, and the second name is just GE. Find me, and I will give you a quiet and worry-free tour of Second Life and show you some of the ways that it can be used for education. But it would be a pleasure to welcome any of your listeners, for sure.
Gavin, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Steve, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to hearing the broadcast when it's up on the net.